All right, everyone. I think we have a good amount of folks here. We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for coming to our Sole Strategies Fundraising Webinar Series. This is the first of many that I hope to do. I am Terrell, I'm the Fundraising Director here at Sole Strategies. And today's session is going to be about creating a compelling pitch for potential donors. So why are you running? Just in my experience working with candidates, quite often the biggest hurdle that they or challenge that they face is that they don't really have a firm grasp on why they're running, how to make a compelling pitch for donors. And it's been a recurring thing that we've seen with all the candidates we work with. And so we wanted to have this free webinar to engage, folks who are running, who are thinking about running, who knows somebody that might be running, or knows of somebody who knows of somebody that might be running, and offer them the resources on building a compelling pitch for potential donors. So as we all know, if you're running for office, you don't have a choice but to fundraise and to raise money for your campaign. And the effectiveness of your fundraising efforts is going to be so closely tied into you being able to explain who you are, why you're running, and package that up to be able to pitch it to potential donors and also voters in your district. So next slide. Brief overview about who we are at Sole Strategies. As you all know, Sole Strategies is a minority and women-owned organization. There are a team. I'm blessed to be able to work with a team of phenomenal colleagues, and we support candidates and organizations with everything from digital strategy and digital planning to branding and graphic design, field operations and voter polling, website development, public relations and endorsements, and most importantly, because I'm biased, the campaign fundraising aspect of it. Next slide. I want to jump right in. We got quite a bit to cover in the next hour or so. So I do briefly want to go over what we'll talk about in this webinar so that you all have an idea of where we're going. So first, we want to talk about why an effective pitch matters. Talk about some of the components of an effective pitch. Getting clear about the why, right? Telling your story, connecting your story and your why. And then dealing with challenging conversations, right? Then we want to do some examples for pitching to potential donors that you might have within your personal network, and then pitching to potential donors outside of your personal network. Also want to go over some basic do's and don'ts of fundraising calls, share an example of an effective pitch call, and then talk a little bit about our Sole Strategies fundraising support, what our call time programs look like, and then open the floor for questions. So next slide. So as I said, an effective pitch is so important to a candidate as far as their ability to build momentum and build that base of support that they'll need to be successful. Oftentimes we work with first-time candidates, grassroots candidates, and a lot of them don't have support of the establishment, so it requires them to go, person to person on that ground roots level to turn out the vote, to get out the vote. But before they even have the resources to do that, they have to be able to reach enough people and raise enough money to be able to afford the costs of get out the vote and new candidate engagement. So let's start from the ground up and build out. What is a pitch? It's just any form of contact between a candidate and a person. So it could be on the phone, it could be in person. Ideally, we always want to get people who know us or who believe in what we're doing to donate, right? So you are appealing to the voter to support your campaign. And by support the campaign, we mean donate to the campaign. And then eventually we want them to go back to the polls and vote for the campaign. An effective pitch matters because it's likely to be the first and only point of contact that you'll have with a potential supporter. Of course, if you're running Even on a local level, you'll have to come across several thousands of folks, and you may not be able to get back to them more than once, right? And so it's important that we hit those folks in the first point of contact that we make with them. We have a strong pitch. We're clear about our story and why we're running for office, and we can convey that to them in a way that makes them feel that our campaign's momentum, right, or our organization or our candidacy is worth investing in. So an effective pitch really could be the difference between your campaign gaining thousands of voters and you raising enough money to win your election. So let's jump into some of the components of an effective pitch. We can go to the next slide. So an effective pitch is going to have these 5 basic kind of important points to it, right? So number 1, you want to be confident and warm. You want to be clear. You want to be open, and you want to be direct and full of gratitude when you're having conversations with a potential donor, a potential campaign supporter, or a potential voter. So number 1, you want to be confident and warm, right? You're asking people to trust in you to get the job done. So you need to be ready to explain, why you have what it takes to be the next person to make change happen. When we talk about getting clear about our core message, right? So your story, your core message, or your why is easily digestible and relatable to your constituents. That is so important. And then you also want to be open. So our top priority is to invite voters in these conversations to talk to us, right? Which for many candidates is something that they struggle with. In call time, we always tell them, the call time managers and I always instruct them to allow space for potential voters and supporters to speak to you, right? You don't want to call someone as a candidate for office, potential candidate for office, somebody running for re-election, what have you. You don't want to call people and kind of dominate the conversation. You want to invite them in to talk about the issues that matter to them the most. You want to be direct as well. So when you get to the point of your pitch where you're going in to make the ask about money, there's no other way to make that effective ask, but then to be direct and portray a sense of urgency. And then also speak a little bit to the impact of the gift that they're going, or the contribution that they're going to make to your campaign. And then just general rule of thumb, you always want to be full of gratitude. We here at Sole Strategies get really in depth with our Kickstart candidates to talk about the fundraising cycle, and stewarding your donors is arguably one of the most important parts of the fundraising cycle, right? So stewarding and thanking donors, keeping them updated on your progress. Even if they are not going to donate to you, or the call, or the pitch didn't come across or wasn't as successful as you would have liked it, it's still important to exercise gratitude and to steward those folks and thank them, because somebody just may not have the giving capacity at that very moment that you ask, but with good stewardship, with following up, chasing the pledge, right? We call it chasing the pledge. You might turn somebody into a secure donor. So you definitely want to move with gratitude. Next slide. I know I've talked a bit about what the core message is and haven't really said how we build out one. And so now we're going to do that, right? So most candidates run for office, they're really, really eager about making change in their community. They have a passion for serving others. But then when you ask them why they're running, their response is like a little bit too vague, and it doesn't speak to the duties of their office, right? So for example, if I'm running for a local government position like city council or county council, I have a much different level of influence than somebody running for a congressional seat. And so when I, as a local candidate, am developing my core messaging, it should speak to, as a local candidate, it should speak to local issues, right? When I'm developing my core message running for Congress, my core message should speak to the duties of a congressional member, right? And so issue, broader level issues like protecting voters' rights, or something even more recent, protecting, women's rights, or LGBTQ rights. Those are more federal level issues, right? Than we would consider our local government issues, right? So like bad infrastructure, rezoning, local budgeting, right? So your core message should really speak to the role of the office you're running for. We'll get a little bit into that in some later slides. Next slide. So how do you create a core message, right? We spoke about the fact that our core message has to be tailored to the duty we're running for, but how do I create it, right? When you're creating your core message, which is really gonna be the common line through, or it'll show up in every aspect of your campaign, right? Everything from your campaign literature, to any handouts you might have, or signage, or your campaign website, or your social media presence, your Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you decide to use, your core message should be apparent in all of those formats, right? Like it should come across in all those formats, right? So you want to know the impact you can make in that role per the ascribed duties, right? So again, I always go back, if you're running for Congress, you shouldn't be talking about the light that doesn't ever work on Main Street, right? If you're running for a local government position or a county council position, you should be talking about local issues, right? And not the broader national level issues. Then you also want to build a story in your core message, right? So you building your story is going to portray how you make a change in the office and what legislation you will support. You should be unafraid when developing your core message to talk about your lived experience and to speak truthfully about the passion, your commitment to your community, your record of success and other roles before stepping into public service, as a way to convince potential supporters that you'll do the same once you take office, but also to let them know that you are walking your talk, right? And you want to make sure that you come in with that confidence, because voters will absolutely do research on you. And so speaking truthfully in your core message, speaking to those lived experiences in your core message are going to be things that voters will search for. So keep those 5 things in your core message, and we'll go to the next slide where we'll talk a little bit about the components of an effective pitch and elements of an effective pitch. So now we'll get really detailed on kind of the elements of the effective pitch, and then we'll talk a little bit after this about what a typical call will look like. So the elements of an effective pitch, right? Use a story that exhibits leadership or overcoming a challenge. Number 1. Number 2, identify the change you're going to make in the community, right? I'm running for office because and you want to be as specific as possible there. Again, the pitch has to be personal and form a sense of connection in the first minute of conversation. A lot of times you might lose folks, especially if you are doing cold calls to folks in your district, or you're reaching out to folks who have very limited time. You get some high-end donors. You got to make a personal connection with those folks in the first minute of interaction. Then you also want to be confident and warm, right? And so we always tell our candidates, we have to make sure that they strike a balance between being too cocky or overly confident with that attractive leadership style, right? Like people want leaders who are powerful and can be effective in their roles, but people are not as drawn to, especially when you're asking them to come on board and support, that just outright cockiness, right? So you want to be confident, but you also want to be warm. You want to have a direct and strong tone of voice. You want to command the attention, right, of that person on the other end of that phone. You also need to be able to like listen, right? And align yourself with the issues that folks are talking about. Again, we see it time and time again. Candidates will get on the phone, or they'll go to an endorsement meeting, or they'll have a public engagement, and they never ask the voters or the person that they're having a conversation with what matters to them most, right? And so candidates will tend to overpower conversations with potential voters. You don't want to do this. You should absolutely be eager to listen to the voters and hesitant to speak over them, right? So for example, I am Mike Johnson, and I'm running for state rep out in Kansas, right? And my campaign priorities are extensive, right? I have everything on there from universal health care to access to equal education, expanding tax credits for families, experimenting with universal basic income, right? My policy positions as a state representative are going to be so exhaustive that there's not going to be a real way for me to speak to all of those, right? That's what you have a website for. You'll send folks to your website. You'll have your policy points listed on the website. But a really powerful way to form a connection with voters that you might be on the phone with, or folks that you might be engaging with, is to ask them what are their priorities, and then issue align yourself with them, right? So you're on the phone with a mom and you're like, hey, you know, Ms. Johnson, I am running for state rep and I'm calling to, you know, introduce myself, let you know I'm running for office. I know you're a registered voter here. Part of what really drives my candidacy is making it reflect the needs of the folks in my district. So I was calling to see what issues you would like to see addressed by your next state representative. Boom, let her talk, let her let you know about her family. You know, her kids are getting ready to graduate, and she's nervous about college, right? And then she's maybe is a homeowner and she's upset about the increase on property tax. And so right then and there, you know, a good way for you to align yourself with is to just to have effective issue alignment is to just run with what she says, right? And so if she talks about education is important to her, you go into your educational policy grab bag and you speak about that, right? She talks about the childcare is important to her. You go into your policy grab bag and you speak about what your educational policies are, what you want to see done. Next slide, sorry. So elements of an effective pitch, right? So let's say we're doing cold calls, right? We're doing call time. Call time is what every candidate should be doing with all of their extra time every single day throughout their race. You should be making well more than 150 calls a day to potential voters in your district. No excuses. You should be calling folks and having conversations with them all the time. So we offer this call structure to our folks that work with us, right? Because we want to make it as accessible and digestible and it's give you the greater outcomes. And this is the call structure that we have developed that we know works. So you want to introduce yourself when you get into a call. You don't want to sound like a telemarketer. You want to be, you know, honest, genuine, be able to establish that true connection. Then you want to talk about the person's needs and what they care about. I already alluded to that, right? So saying I'm calling to see what issues matter most to voters in my district, and that's why I reached out to you today. Would you care to tell me more about what issues you want to see your next representative address? Here, I do also want to say, because I didn't mention it last time, you also kind of want to hold space for them to take a time to think about the issues that matter to them. Be comfortable with that awkward silence for a moment. You know, our thing, we always have with candidates, we tell them like, you work in political organizing, we work in political organizing, we live and breathe politics. Most folks are not thinking about what they want their next representative to do when you pick up the phone and call them, even if you have an appointment to call them, because they don't live and breathe politics. They might be just getting off work, or you know, on break at work, taking their kids to extracurriculars. So you're catching people at an off guard time. You catch people when they're off guard. So give them time to think about what matters to them most and be comfortable with those moments of silence. They might also ask you to repeat stuff, right? Like, especially if you're calling and you're saying you're running for a state level office and they've been recently redistricted and you're reaching out to them to let them know about that. A lot of people are just not there. They're not thinking about it. They're not in the headspace. So give some time for them to be able to respond effectively to what you offer. So you want, after you've talked about their needs and what they cared about, and you've really leaned into listening in your pitch, you want to make sure that your campaign is viable, but don't be arrogant about it. And then number 4, you know, making sure the donor is invested. That comes from asking questions so you can get a read on their investment in your cause or candidacy. Then we already mentioned this, the importance of an urgent ask. So you want to be as specific as possible, right? There's a very different, a much less effective way to go about your pitch is to just ask somebody to donate X amount, right? Like, will you donate $100 to my campaign for Congress is very different than saying to somebody, your donation of $100 will help us buy 1,000 mailers and send them to folks who have been recently redistricted. Can I count on you to come in and make a donation by Wednesday so that we can get the mailers out by the end of the week? Very different than saying, can you just donate $100 to my campaign? Talk about how they'll take your campaign's momentum to the next level, right? Number 6 is going to be in here, and we'll repeat it over and over if you ever work with Sole Strategies. We often remind our candidates a little too much to listen to what folks are saying. So don't overtalk them. Don't continue to talk, just listen. Give them a moment to really get into, you know, what matters to them. Make sense? And then again, thanking them, their gratitude. A lot of times you're going to get off. The truth is, you know, when you're making calls, people are not going to make a donation unless they know you personally by reading their credit card numbers off, though that does happen every now and then. Most people will get a link, they'll go to your website, they'll review, they'll take a couple days, right? They've got all these things going on that came up between you getting off the phone with them after they pledged and them actually securing that donation. So you want to thank them, right? You're either going to continue to negotiate the ask, right? So if you say, may you donate $100 so we can get out 1,000 mailers by the end of the week. And if they say 100, well, that's way too high, then you negotiate down to 75 or 50, or tell them, hey, how about you donate $25 every month before the election ends, right? You don't know, but it's very important that they know that you appreciate their time, right? And them taking the time to take a call from you, and always end on a good note, even if you don't have a good conversation, because they may not be a donor right now, but they could be your strongest volunteer, your strongest hired campaign staff member, or your strongest public supporter when it comes election time. So don't count them all the way out. Next slide. Okay. So words matter, y'all, in elections. Like, everything comes down to semantics. When you are having conversations with folks, you don't want to end up in a place where you end up running for re-election and people are holding you accountable, and you are known, right, throughout your community, and you're telling people when you're a candidate, I'm going to pass legislation that will guarantee universal basic income for everybody in my district, right? That is very different than saying I support legislation that guarantees universal income, right? And so just be mindful of the words and the promises that you make in your pitch to folks, because you may be held accountable for them in the future. Next slide. So getting clear about your why. And we have a whole section on getting clear about your why, because we again we've worked with several hundred candidates that are running, right? And it always, when we ask them, what is your why? Like saying to folks in your district you're running for office because you want to see change is not an effective or compelling why, right? That could be very true, right? People who run for office, by and large, are folks who want to see positive change in their community, or there was something that happened, a moment that happened that really made them aware of the disparity in their neighborhood or of some frustration that exists. But if somebody asks you why you're running, you can't just say, because I care and I want to see change, right? When you're thinking about getting clear about your why, you want to think about how your why ties in with your story. We'll talk a little bit about storytelling in the next couple slides, but you want to make sure that your why, right, why I'm running ties into my story, who I am, what led me to the point where I decided to file, to be a candidate with my Board of Elections office or a state secretary, depending on where you live. Also think about, why should the person you're talking to care about your organization or your campaign, right? Think about how many hundreds of folks are running for office in your state alone or your county alone every year. And what is it about you and your campaign that is special, that differentiates you from other campaigns, right? And so that ties back into your story. So what are your lived experiences? What are your connections? What employment opportunities that have you had in the past or currently that have shaped you in a way that you now want to step into public service? What makes your campaign different? We already said that. Why should the person you're talking to care about your campaign, right? So letting them know that your campaign is an opportunity to have their voice heard from somebody who is not, part of the political establishment and is running from a point of true selflessness and desire to see progression or move their community forward. And then I always ask, candidates who are struggling with getting clear about why they're running, what's the most interesting part of their story? What is the most eye-opening or eye-awakening part of who you are that has led you to this moment? And then there's always, the putting up a mirror effect, right? So pretend that you are approached by a grassroots candidate that looks somewhat like you. What would they say that would make you pull out your credit card and donate to their campaign? So those are 5 things you should think about when you're getting clear about your why. And now we're going to jump into telling your story. So next slide. All right. Creating a compelling story. You want to show, not tell, why you're electable. You want to connect your story to why voters should support you, right? And again, you want to use those details. You want to connect your story to why voters should support you, right? And so being unafraid to speak about personal challenges you might have faced, right? And so we've had candidates who are single mothers and have had issues, or have been stressed about childcare, access to early education for their children. So they're running in their neighborhood because they want to see their city have universal pre-K, right? Or they want to guarantee a stipend for new mothers. And so you want to be able to connect your story to why people should support your campaign. Then also use details to make the story memorable. You shouldn't be afraid as somebody who's running for public office to speak truly from the heart about experiences that you've had, lived, encounters that you've had with other candidates. Perhaps with other candidates, but with other constituents in your district. But you also want to leave voters feeling like they can trust you. But then also try not to get too political unless the situation calls for it. And by trying not to get too political, you still want to have that level of personal relatability when you're having conversations with people. And so we don't want to get too political where we are almost robotic. You want to maintain your personality, your energy, And unless, somebody is having a conversation with you about policy issues, you do absolutely want to respond with your, political hat on, so to speak, so that they know that you are qualified to deal with legislation or to deal with the legislative process as a current candidate and future representative. So next slide. So now we're going to go into some story prompts, right? So candidates are always asking, okay, I'm trying to develop my story. I've been thinking about it. I just don't really know how to pull out one story from, say, my 30 years of lived experiences that I can recall. I just don't know where to start with developing my story. Well, we got you covered. That's what Sole Strategies is here for, right? So when thinking about your story and what is the most compelling part of your story, think about these 6 points, right? So what was the moment that made you decide to run? Literally get out a pen and piece of paper, or write down in your notes in your phone. But think about what was the moment that made you decide to run for office, right? What is your top policy issue and why do you care about it? What caused you to take action on it, right? What is your leadership style? Talk about a time that you've led an organization or exemplified leadership traits that you now see as important, essential to your community's development or preservation or progress. And think about what qualifications you have that meet the seat's needs, right? And so if you've been a leader of a nonprofit for several years and you've balanced several $1 million of budgets year after year and served, tens of thousands of folks in your community, you are qualified to run for office, right? You just need to speak to the work that you've done. And anybody, in my view, is qualified to run for office, right? So even if you are a first generation college student and you don't have, a long tenure of work history or success in work history, you have a lot of qualifications, right? Like tenacity, resilience. You are obviously a trendsetter. So they're not to say that you are only qualified to run for office if you have, this long resume of leadership roles. Your lived experience is the same amount of qualification, so to speak, as a top executive at a nonprofit. You just got to filter out what the work that you've done in the past is, or what lived experience you had, and how those experiences qualify you to run for the seat, right? Think about some personal attributes that you have that connect you to your voters, right? So, of course, if you're running somewhere where you were born and raised, you're a native of that community, or you see yourself reflected in a lot of the demographic makeup of the community, you should absolutely talk about those personal attributes. If you live somewhere where you have been of service for years and years, or you show up to a certain event year after year, you shouldn't be afraid to use that as a personal connection that you have with that community. And then if you're still struggling, talk about what your values are. Literally write down, okay, what are my values? Who am I as a person? And what is it about my makeup that makes me someone who would be effective at running for office, right? Am I reliable? Am I trustworthy? How did I become reliable and trustworthy, right? That'll take you back to your story, and you can recall specific moments where your trustworthiness or your organization or your dedication or resilience was challenged. And you can speak to that, and shouldn't be afraid to speak to it candidly with folks in your constituency. So next slide. So now we talked about our why, we talked about our story, we talked about core messaging. So now we really want to connect the story with the why. Next slide. So the base of a compelling pitch is a strong story and a clear why, right? Your whole reason for running for office. So when you can connect your story and your why, as a first step of an effective fundraising pitch, and you can communicate that to potential voters, you are 10 steps ahead, right? And so, next slide. So when you're writing down your why, right, I like to think about things visually sometimes. So, you're sitting there, you're taking a moment, and I'm gonna allow, just because I think that the time is fresh to do this, I'm gonna allow like 2 minutes, right, for us to jot down why you are running for office or why you're considering running for office. Remember to be as specific as possible. Recall the exact moment in writing down your why that you decided you would run for office. And then do not include any generic statements like I'm running for office because I want to see change, or I'm running for office because I care. That is not good enough. If you are someone who is running and you really care, you can make an impact not running for office, right? You can make an impact. If you want to see change, you could see change by leading a nonprofit or starting your own nonprofit. That is too vague, and you want to speak right to the ascribed duties of the office, right? So what is it about running for Congress based on the ascribed duties that they have that makes you feel like you are qualified to sit in that seat? What is it about city council and the responsibilities that they take on that make you qualified to then run for a city council seat? What is it about the county commissioner? What does a county commissioner do that you feel like you would do 10 times better? What is it that you would do as a state representative? And you should really, really think about that if you haven't either, right? So what committees would you serve on as the next state representative or the next Congress member that you feel like you would do really well, or you have some type of force to make an impact in? Or, and this is the case for a lot of folks, which is not bad, a lot of people are running because they really want to have accessible and relatable and reliable representatives in office. So if that's why you're running for city council, you can speak to that. But then you also do need to do research about the role, right? Because city council, depending on what jurisdiction you live in, you could be really in a figurehead type of role when it comes to making change. Or if you're somewhere where there's an awful lot of city ordinances in place, or legislation that they have in place, you could be in committee meetings all day, or protesting or participating in some sort of community gathering. So you do want to look really into the roles. I know a lot of people just think, oh, I'm running for office, so that means, but then they don't really understand, what the office entails. So jot down your why. Take a couple minutes to jot down your why. Why are you running for office? You're from a nonprofit. Why did you decide to be in that org? And then what is it about your story that makes you qualified for the role you want to have in your community? So I'll take a brief pause, and while these things are fresh, and if there are any questions, again, feel free to drop a line in the chat. I'll also share my contacts, so if things come up later, you can also reach out at any time. But I'll give you all a moment to do that.
I just wanted to hop in and add one comment, Terrell, because you was on a roll right there. Very good points. One thing when you're thinking about your why, even though maybe a specific event, like for instance, last cycle, there was a lot of people who said they wanted to run for office because of January 6th. That was a very shocking moment in our nation. Like, it was crazy, but we still need more context, like Terrell was saying, as to what you're going to do because of that. So you can say, I'm running for office because of Trump, or I'm running for office because of blank, but provide that context and provide, the audience that you're speaking to with more information on not only why this inspired you, but how are you going to affect this? What is your role in political office going to do to make sure things like January 6th don't happen again, for example?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, thank you. That is our phenomenal partner and operations director, Amani. And yes, so yeah, you can't just say that you're running because you don't like one person or you don't like one event. What is it about that event that sparked whatever it was in you that made you now want to run because you know you can do that job just like they can or better than they can. Take about another minute or so. Um, okay, we have a question from Mike. How do you deal with potential donors who want policies that differ from your own, and how do you get out of conversations that run too long? Good question, Mike. So the question was, how do you deal with potential donors who want policies that differ from your own, and how do you get out of conversations that run too long? Two great questions. I'll go ahead and answer now, and then does that mean that there are no good answers? When talking about your why, or could you rephrase that? Mike, does that mean there are no good answers? And then I'm going to answer. I do want to answer now the dealing with potential donors who have different policy viewpoints from you. This one is a complicated one, and I was actually just having a conversation. It depends on the office that you're running for, right? For example, if I'm running for city council, and let's talk about the tough topics. If I'm running for city council and I am you know, pro women's rights, and I'm on the phone with somebody who because of their religious beliefs is firmly against abortion. As a city council member, I would never be dealing with policies around legislation to protect rights, right? That's a congressional level issue, state level issue, right? Not a local level issue. So if you're running on the local level and somebody asks you a question about a policy or an issue that is really kind of reserved for the federal or state level, or hey, let's say you're actually running for a federal level position and somebody asks you about a local level issue like the traffic or the development of a new highway system or new public transportation that they think is going to make the neighborhood ugly. You get out of those conversations by, you know, thanking the person for sharing their concerns with you. I wouldn't personally, especially if you think that y'all's views are going to differ on it, really go down the rabbit hole with them, but just let them know that, hey, you know, I'm running for city council and that is a federal issue. However, you know, this is where I stand on those issues, but that's not something I'm going to really be delving in. You can, you know, if that is the case and that's something that comes up, but now if they ask you a question about policy that differs from, you know, who you are, thank them for their time, and then try to find some common ground on other topics that you might agree on, and then thank them for that. Say, you know, part of the reason why I'm running is because I really want to be involved in those robust conversations about what change looks like. So though we have differing viewpoints on this one policy issue, I'm sure we have a lot more that we align with and kind of move from there. I hope that helps. And getting out of long conversations, just, you know, politely say, you know, this has been a really great conversation. I do want to make sure that I'm reaching out to as many folks as possible in the next 4 hours. Would it be okay if we resumed our conversation next week or tomorrow? If it is a conversation that you know that this person will never support you and they're just giving you a tough time just because they need somebody to scream at. Let them finish their point. Don't really engage in conversation as far as question asking, just kind of validate, okay, thank you. Oh, yes, I understand. And then thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to express the issues that matter to you the most. And I hope we keep in touch and that you vote in the next election and you can kind of segue out that way. But that is something that you will run into a lot, especially if you start having really deep conversations with folks. You could end up in a call for an hour. So you can kind of, be honest, let them know, I'm really appreciative of the time we took today. I really want to continue this conversation. I'm getting pulled away by my campaign manager now, but I would love to continue this conversation. Here's my contact. I hope we can keep in touch. If it's not a good conversation and you don't think it's going to go anywhere, regardless of what you say, just thank them for their time and go to the next topic. All right, next slide. So pitching to potential donors, right? Here we group folks, potential donors, into two different categories: folks within your personal network and folks outside of your personal network. Pitching to folks in your personal network is going to have a very different feel to it than pitching to folks outside of your personal network. So next slide. So when you're making pitches to your within your personal network, you don't have to sound as like polished, or you want to bring the authentic person that you knew them as back when you met them or first established a connection with them forward, right? And so you remind them of the conversation and the connection. Hey, this is Mark. How you doing? We went to high school together. Are you still in the area? I saw on Facebook that you just got married. Congratulations, right? Explain then you want to go right into your reason for calling. Let them know that you want to share the exciting news of your campaign and that you care about the issues. And then when making the ask, it should be very straightforward because you already have a personal connection with them. So it does take a little bit of the pressure off. And people from within your personal network, just because you've interacted with them much more, are going to be way more likely to donate and support. So you just say, hey, I'm asking you to donate because you know who I am. I'm a person that moves with integrity. I'll be a great representative, and I'm going to make sure this campaign is successful, but I need your support. Very straightforward. Next slide. But when you start pitching to folks outside of your personal network, or you cold calling neighbors in your district, it can get a little choppy, right? I will share a guide, sample guide of that we offer when you're making pitches to potential donors outside of your network. Next slide. So of course, in any introduction, you want to intro with confidence, be warm and direct. Hi, this is John Richards, Democratic candidate for Dallas County Commissioner. You want to, come in direct, don't keep the intro too long, but you do want to have a bit of positivity behind it so it doesn't sound like a sales call or a bill collector. So when you're explaining your reason for calling, let them know you're calling to learn about the issues that matter most to them, and then listen to their response, which is very different than when you explain your reason for calling with somebody in your personal network. And then when you're making the donation ask to somebody who's not in your personal network, but you might have had an encounter with them or may not, but still reaching out because you want to share your campaign to folks who do and don't know you alike. You just say, hey, I'm feeling really good about the momentum we've had. At the end of the conversation, you've listened to them, y'all have issue aligned, you've listened, hey, I'm feeling really good about the momentum we've had in the race so far. But to be able to solve the issues we discussed in our conversation, the reality is that we need donations from local people who truly care, just like you. And so it'll have a little bit of a different vibe to it, right? Because then you'll talk about the race campaign with folks outside of your network, but then with folks in your network, you want to kind of turn it into personal attributes and remind them of who they are, right? Okay, next slide. So, does anybody want to share before we go into some do's and don'ts of making calls, the whys that they wrote down, the reasons that they are decided to run? You can drop it in the chat. You can come off mute, totally up to you. We got to have one person on here that wants to share their reason for running. All right. Yes, like Mike, this is something that absolutely can be used as a talking point with folks, right? And it exactly. So you have been able to connect your story with your why, right? So you're running because you want to improve cybersecurity for all citizens because of your cybersecurity experience within the military. Now that one, you know, you want to make sure that this applies, because again, we don't want to, and this is great as far as connecting your story with your why, right? Your lived experience, your employment experience with why you're running. But you want to make sure that you can look into what improving cybersecurity for all citizens means, right? So you have a lot of room there to work. And I think that this is actually a really strong, can be used as a very strong pitch and differentiate your campaign from a lot of other campaigns. But then you'll have to really go into what improved protections for cybersecurity looks like and be prepared to have conversations for it. And great, you got the thesis on hand for it. So shouldn't be too much of a challenge. But I love this. I like that you're able to use those personal reasons and your personal story to connect it to your why you're running. And then if other folks want to share their reasons for running, offline, privately, or at a future date, we'll share my contact at the end. But I like where Mike is headed with this. Okay, so some do's and don'ts. Let's get into it. So we don't want to take things personally. A lot of candidates, when they are running for office, they expect folks to share the same passion, positivity, and dedication for a community that they have. And people will say things that might hurt will hurt your feelings. People will ask you tough questions, right? But if they can't ask their future public representative tough questions, then it doesn't make them feel confident that you will be able to handle the duties of the job. So be prepared not to take anything personal. Don't make your core message too long, right? That core message, your story and your why can't be too long. You don't have a lot of time with folks. And if you tend to overtalk, you'll lose them, and you don't want to lose or disengage them. Sorry, I got a question. I will address it in a moment. You also don't want to simply list your policy issues and relevant experience. So you're not going to write down all of your top 10 campaign priorities and list them to voters. And then you don't want to be, I say wishy-washy, but indirect with the ask, or spend too long on one call and you don't want to forget to follow up. So you do want to put in the hours, always keep it positive, get straight to the point after you've had a chance to listen first and have had a chance to speak to the issues, and align yourself with the issues and adjust your message to the individual. Make the ask, get straight to the point, provide a sense of urgency in the ask. And then you always want to follow up with your potential donors, which is also known as chasing your pledge. So people will say, yes, oh my gosh, I'm really excited about your campaign. And then anything could happen between when y'all end y'all call and the next time that they remember that they had promised to donate to your campaign. One moment. So I have a question. Is the following why too general? I'm running because representation matters. So this person is a Latino individual, and there are very few in the state office. To just say I'm running because representation matters is an important part of your story. I'm assuming because you identify as Latino, it's important. Growing up, you didn't see a lot of representation from Latino representatives, and you felt left out, I'm assuming, and representation matters because we need representatives who can speak to the needs of the folks that they represent. Is much different than just saying I'm running because representation matters. So you need to dive a little bit more into that, right? Why does representation matter? Right. So you should literally include that in your core message, why representation matters. Talk about what it was or how you felt growing up, or how you feel as a Latino person, not seeing but just a few Latino representatives in office. But this is I'm not telling you to scrap your why. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying develop it, right? Be more specific in the way that you talk about your running because representation matters. But I like that. Right, what issues in your community have impacted people in your district, and why that disparate impact is because of a lack of representation. Just very different than just saying I'm running because representation matters. Representation does absolutely matter, right? But we want to explain that a little further. Okay, next slide. So I do want to share an example of an effective pitch call, just because when you start doing call time, which again should take up all your time when you're running for office, a sample call is going to look something like this, right? Like, I'm on the phone and I am saying, I'm calling Miss Johnson. All right, so I'm like, hi, may I speak to Miss Johnson? My name is Terrell, and I'm a Democrat running to represent Maryland's 6th Congressional District in the upcoming general election on November 8th. I'm calling local residents to talk about the issues they care about, because it's essential that I build a platform that truly reflects the needs of my district. So if you have a moment, I would love to hear about the issues you'd like to see addressed by your next representative. Boom. You did the quick intro. You came in warm and confident. Hi, I'm Terrell. I'm a Democrat running to represent Maryland's 6th Congressional District in the upcoming election on November 8th. I'm just calling to talk to residents about the issues that they care about the most, because it's essential to build a platform, right? So you've come in warm, you've done your intro. Let them talk. Listen to the answers that they provide. They're going to ask you about the election date. They're going to say, oh, I didn't know I got redistricted. Oh, wait, what's your name again? Wait, I'm going to pull up your website, right? So let them talk, listen to the answer. You may have to even remind them that you're calling them to talk about the issues, because they will just kind of be sidetracked by the fact that somebody who's running for office picked up the phone and asked them to introduce themselves and ask them about the issues. So you might want to, repeat the question, like, I want to hear about the issues that you'd like to see addressed by your next Congress member. Listen to the answer, then we go into issue alignment, right? So you are absolutely right. That is a very serious issue. And it's actually one of the reasons why I decided to run for office in the first place. Then you want to enter your personal experience you have with that issue, actions you've taken to do it, to fix it, and your plan to address it, right? This is also where your core message comes in, right? So you talk about what personal experience you had, which is your story, and then you go into your why. That's where you insert your core message. Then you say to them, hey, I'm really feeling really good about the momentum we made in the race so far. But to be able to solve the issues that we just talked about, we need support and donations from local people just like you who truly care. Most folks are gonna, if they have a political understanding or a high level political background, they probably knew that the ask for a donation was coming, or most people will be caught off guard. But, you know, then in between that awkward moment between you making the ask and talking about the need for your campaign support, talk a little bit more about the campaign. So say, I'm happy to say my campaign is 100% grassroots and people powered. So with that being the case, we rely solely on donations to accomplish our goals, right? Is there any way you could spare even $100 to help my campaign get 1,000 mailers out before the end of next week? Very straightforward, very simple. You're not doing more than 1 or 2 minutes of talking. You want to leave space for them to have to speak to you about the issues that matter to them, to ask you questions. You want to take robust notes in that call of any interactions you have with the donor. Make note if there's anything that stands out so that when you do get ready, right, to follow up with them, that you'll have, you know, kind of like a cheat sheet. We provide the tracking sheets here at Sole Strategies, but the follow-up is really kind of where most candidates find themselves needing more support, and which is where Sole Strategies really comes in, and we do help candidates with everything from that initial contact, fleshing out their own personal Rolodex, keeping track of conversations, helping with follow-up calls, and really supporting the candidates. So that'll be like what calls will look like. And again, without that strong core message, without understanding your why and your story, it's going to be very challenging. When you are faced with challenges or feedback from potential donors, that is tougher, right, for you to navigate that. So you want to make sure you have that core message down to a T, right? So again, core message being made up of your story, your lived experiences, and connecting them with your why, right? So what it is about who you are that made you step into this position at this specific time. Next slide. So at Sole Strategies, I want to speak about how we help at our fundraising capabilities. So because call time, again, the expectation is that you're not making less than 150 calls to voters in your district. Next slide. That you have a lot going on, right? And here's those strategies. We provide critical data on voters and potential donors. We give you a dedicated call time manager to keep you accountable and on track. You'll meet with them for up to 5 days a week for 1-hour sessions. We give intensive training on fundraising fundamentals and strategies. We give you hands-on collaboration with like-minded candidates from different states, but then we also give you the infrastructure that you need to run a robust call time program. So everything from budget tracking guides to call time guides for the candidate and campaign staff and volunteers. We have 2 call time programs. We have our month-to-month call time program, which guarantees you that one-on-one time with your call time manager. We give our candidates 2,000 contacts at no charge of registered voters in their district. And then we have our Kickstart fundraising program, which is a 6-week-long cohort. We have one actually coming up in 2 weeks. So if fundraising support is something you're going to be interested in, hit me up. I'm going to share my information, and we would love to have you as part of our Kickstart fundraising program. And that is 6 weeks. We give you 2,500 contacts. You get all the infrastructure. In addition to that, you get, we have our Saturday training sessions where we talk about fundraising fundamentals. But the most important thing, and the feedback that we constantly get from candidates, is that we help them elevate their campaign, elevate the seriousness of their campaign, the momentum. We hold the candidates that we work with accountable, because we meet with them way more to provide that one-on-one support, but then also being able to work in a cohort with other candidates running for office is something that the candidates really, really appreciate. So I do want to go to the next slide and make time for questions, as we've kind of talked a bit about what it is in the core message and what makes a compelling campaign pitch, and how you connect your story and your why. I know I've talked quite a bit, so if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, speak, turn your mic off and just ask a question, or I'll also share my email as well, and I'm happy to have a conversation about any additional support you might need. Okay, yes. Hey, yes. So we're gonna absolutely have this available to be recorded, and we're gonna put this up. So don't worry, Trey. No worries, Poncella. It's not this. This isn't particularly geared totally to folks who are running for office. But if you are, a nonprofit or an organizer and you're looking for some fundraising support, the essentials are the same across all realms of fundraising. So I hope that you had some good takeaways as well. Next slide, I do want to share before a lot folks jump off my contact. And I'm happy to continue conversations. As I said, my email address is Terrell@Sole Strategies. And I'm always happy to talk. And even if you are not thinking about running for office now, you can never start fundraising or learning how to fundraise too early. And I actually, Poncella, came from the nonprofit fundraising space before I started political fundraising. So trust me when I say the skills are absolutely transferable and the blueprint is the same. It's just more about adjusting constituencies, right? So we look at voters and on the political side, and in the nonprofit space, we look at our constituents that we serve. So there's not much of a difference, but we got you here too if you need the help. All right. Well, without further ado, thank y'all so much for attending our webinar on crafting a compelling pitch and why you're running for office. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with y'all, and I look forward to seeing you all at future webinars, and hopefully you all found some of the information that we shared useful, and don't forget to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Y'all have